Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse webinar conference call. Please note today's conference is being recorded. At this time, I would like to turn the conference over to Nigel Vann. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. So as you see on your screens, today's webinar is entitled Understanding Trauma-Informed Programming, a Primer for Responsible Fatherhood Programs. And we've got a very interesting conversation coming up, I think. As those of you who've joined us before know, we provide these webinars and other resources as part of a learning community that you can contribute to and learn from. And as always, we welcome and encourage your input and participation. Just want to do a few housekeeping things in terms of what you're seeing on your screens here. You'll see a chat box on the left there where you can chat among each other. In the bottom right-hand corner, we have the Ask a Question box, and that's where you can pose a question for the presenters. So we encourage you to do that. And then at the end of the webinar, we'll have a short Q&A period so the presenters can respond to as many of those questions as possible. If we don't get to all the questions, we do post some additional answers online afterwards. In the box next to that, we have some downloadable resources that we'll say a little bit more about as we go through. And then to the left of that, there's various web links. There's the fatherhood.gov website for the Clearinghouse, and then the All Dads Matter and the Danham Project, represented by our presenters today. And then also Dr. Derek Gordon and his link at the Yale School of Medicine. You also see a link to join us on Twitter down there as well. And yeah, I think that's all I need to say in terms of the housekeeping. And so again, welcome. And before we move forward, I'm going to ask Lisa Washington Thomas, who's already welcomed you in the chat box there. But Lisa is our leader at the Office of Family Assistance, who make all this possible. So let me turn it to you, Lisa, for a few words of welcome. You're not on mute, are you, Lisa?
I am on mute. Thank you, Nigel. And thank you for introducing me. I am Lisa Washington Thomas. I'm the branch chief and the federal lead for the National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse. This topic is very of interest to many of the programs that we work with at the Office of Family Assistance. Not only do we have Healthy Marriage and Responsible Fatherhood grants. We have 91 grantees this time. We also are the federal agency that administers the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families programs, as well as the Health Profession and Opportunity grants. So today's webinar will continue a conversation that we began February of 2015 in the webinar, Let's Talk About Mental Health, when we focus on helping fathers identify and address mental health and post-traumatic stress disorder issues. It's likely that many participants in fatherhood programs have been exposed to trauma, perhaps as a result of violence in their families or communities, as a result of poverty, as a result of experiences before, during, and after incarceration or military service. These experiences can impact key executive functioning skills, such as how one thinks, feels, behaves, and relates to others. I know I was at a seminar recently in which service providers from the Washington, D.C. area was talking about their trauma-informed programs. And one of the ways that they're trying to change the thinking of their case managers is that they want to stop people from asking, what's wrong with you, and to start thinking about what has happened to cause you to act this way. And I think if we keep that in the back of our mind, it'll help us if we encounter a sales clerk or another person in the public that may not be responding to us the way we want. It will help us to think differently about having another negative reaction. So that has really resonated with me, and I hope it does with you. According to the U.S. Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, a trauma-informed approach can be implemented in any type of service setting. and is distinct from trauma-specific interventions that are designed specifically to address the consequences of trauma and facilitate healing. We are providing today's webinar to help you think about how trauma-informed your program is and to share resources that can help you look at ways to integrate more trauma-informed knowledge into your program policies, procedures, and practices. I hope that you found this webinar informative and helpful. We'll be asking 2 poll questions during the webinar to get an idea of what do you think you could do in your programs. This helps our presenters frame their comments to fit your experiences. We also will ask for your feedback about today's conversation at the end of the webinar. And we want to also ask you to please continue to send any ideas for future webinars or any questions that you might have about this webinar or any other Clearinghouse programming to info@fatherhood.gov. Again, info, I-N-F-O, at fatherhood.gov. Again, we are particularly interested in feedback about the information today and any other topics that are of interest to you so that we can cover them in future webinars. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy our dynamic speakers that we have for you. Nigel?
Thank you very much, Lisa. So I'm just going to move through a few opening slides here, and then we'll have that first poll question that Lisa mentioned. It's just a reminder of how to ask a question. Again, use the Ask a Question box for the presenters. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, this is just a brief overview of the kind of things we do at the National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse. You can see the website there. We have a toolkit that's very helpful, particularly I think for folk who are just starting a new program. And you can go to the webinars link there to see archives of all the previous webinars and the slides from this webinar. Along with the recording, you can actually listen to it again, and all the materials at the bottom there, they'll be available for download in a few weeks' time. We've had some problems with the info@fatherhood.gov email link. If you do send an email and don't get a response in a few days, please use that alternate email there for Enzo Ferraggiaro, who's behind the scenes at the moment making all this work for us. And I also want to stress the toll-free number there. Any father or mother or practitioner can call that number, and it's staffed, not 24 hours, but it's staffed on a regular basis during the week with English and Spanish speakers, and they can help connect you to programs in your community. They can particularly help with co-parenting issues that a couple may be having. They can get both folk on the line if need be. That they are trained counselors. And you also see our Facebook and Twitter handles. And again, see Lisa's name at the bottom there, along with Kenneth Braswell, our project director, and Patrick Patterson, our project manager, and their email addresses are there. So these are our goals today, and if you saw the announcement for the webinar, you'll be familiar with these. Basically, what we want to do is talk about some of the things that Lisa mentioned in her opening remarks in terms of what we need to know in order to be more trauma-informed. And we're particularly talking here about being trauma-informed so that we sort of interact with people in a understanding way, as Lisa said, so that we understand where other people are coming from, and we don't make these judgments that there's something wrong with them. It's more about what may have happened to them. And so we're not talking about how you help people fix some of these things. We're not talking about a trauma-informed service or intervention, but we're talking about being more trauma-informed in how you provide your services. Our 3 presenters today will be Derek Gordon from the Yale University School of Medicine in New Haven, Connecticut, and Lamar Henderson from the All Dads Matter program in Merced, California, and Kerry Pruitt from the Danham Project in Birmingham, Alabama. And I'll say a few more words about each of them as we move towards their presentations. I just wanted to point out a few things. You'll actually see, in the resources there's a resources file. We misspelled trauma on that. I do apologize for that. But in that there is a couple of resources from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, and I've got 3 slides here where we just pulled from one of those just to point out some of the key aspects of what we're talking about as trauma-informed programming. And I think actually as we go through this conversation, a lot of you who are working directly with fathers, you'll see that you do a lot of these things, but you maybe don't use the word trauma-informed. But in terms of these 4 R's, it's just sort of realizing that there is a widespread impact of trauma. It's being able to recognize what trauma is, and it's not just something that's wrong with the person. And you know how to respond, but not necessarily by providing direct services. And definitely not trying to re-traumatize people, so you create this welcoming environment where you recognize that we're all in this together and we're trying to help each other. And these are some of the key principles that, again, I think a lot of you probably do in one way or another. You create a safe environment for fathers to come to, and you create this sort of sense of trust that keeps them coming back. Peer support is obviously a key thing that helps dads bond and help each other. And there's this feeling that we're not just telling you what to do, we're helping you. We're empowering you, and we're also doing that in a way that totally recognizes where individuals come from. Now also, according to SAMHSA, these are some things that a trauma-specific intervention program does. So these may not be things that you necessarily do if you're trauma-informed. But in terms of working with survivors of trauma, they certainly need to be respected. There needs to be some interrelation between the symptoms of trauma and the other things that could be sort of presenting issues. And that if someone is really trying to help people deal with these kind of things, that you can't do it just with the survivors, you need to involve others. And our presenters are going to talk about some of these things as we move forward. So before we start Derek's presentation, I'd just like to bring the first poll question up. And just sort of, if you could just take a minute to respond to this. Have members of your program staff received any formal training to increase understanding of trauma-informed programming? We ask these questions just to sort of let the presenters have a sense of who they're talking to and what kind of things you've been doing so far. So it's looking like approximately getting on for 2/3, a bit less than 2/3 have had some trauma-informed programming. I'll just leave that up for a minute as I introduce Derek. So again, Derek is an assistant professor at the Yale University School of Medicine. As part of his work with men, he focuses on enhancing men's health, increasing their positive involvement in family and community life, and identifying factors that enhance the access and use of preventive and indicated healthcare services by men on the fringes. He served as an investigator on various federal and state-funded projects, including some analysis of factors that either support or undermine men transitioning from prison back to the community and the engagement of low-income, non-custodial fathers. And you can read more about Derek in the bios that you can download from the resources box. But he's a very knowledgeable chap, and he's got some great stuff to share with you. So with that, let me turn it over to Derek. Derek, the time is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nigel. I want to say welcome to everyone and begin by sharing with you guys that it's a pleasure to be talking to you about this issue. And I will come back to this, but I was trained as a clinical psychologist, but I function as a clinical community psychologist. So I try to ask questions in my work and my research that are relevant to the community of interest and answer questions that the community wants to have answered. And so my interest in this area actually spawned from evaluation project I did with Connecticut's Department of Social Services on the Fatherhood program that we had here. And I was curious about what factors will play a role in men reporting that they had limited access to their children. And what I meant by that was some court or some other judicial system saying you can't have access to your kids, And when we looked at it, we saw that the biggest factor that was there was their own report of a history of childhood sexual abuse or childhood trauma. And so this question began to kind of percolate in the back of my head about how might this issue of trauma be continually impacting the lives of the men that we're serving. And so I just wanted to give you that as a contextual introduction to kind of how I got to thinking about these issues, because I think it's something that was present in our work, but prior to me kind of asking that question was a little bit missing. And I use the word a little bit there, kind of hedging my bets there, but actually missing. So I want to begin by kind of talking a little bit about what this presentation will be from my perspective and what this presentation is not. And the first piece is that, as most of us know, kind of walking into the space related to trauma requires us to kind of have some good skills that doesn't cause more harm than not. So from my perspective, this presentation is not sufficient to make one an expert in trauma. It is not designed to give the skills to treat individuals who present with trauma histories. Rather, what I hope that we will begin to do is it begins as a primer. It begins as either an introduction, or for those of you who have gone through some formal training, a reminder of the factors that are impacting kind of important in thinking about this issue of trauma. It encourages us to do a little bit of self-assessment, not only as agencies, but actually as individuals, because the issue that comes up as we kind of do this work is that our own stuff also gets triggered as we kind of work to address these issues. And then the last thing is to kind of push for a more comprehensive approach as an agency and as individuals, as we work with our clients, to kind of think about these folks from a more holistic perspective. In one of the resource lists that Nigel and the folks at the National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse will give you is some of the work that we've been doing. All of us talk about the importance of kind of engaging men and fathers and being kind of healthy assets to their families, but we all know that this work didn't come out of the kind of altruistic, oh yeah, guys or fathers are really important, we want to engage them. It came out of under the spirit of we have to help make these men start to pay for their kids. And so we recognize that that might be an end result, but the beginning is more so what's the emotional bond and the emotional connectedness that we need to create for folks to kind of actually buy into, their role and show meaning that extends beyond dollar signs. And so in some of the resources that are attached, there's some work that we've done in Connecticut that speaks to kind of how we think about these issues in that way. And so kind of beginning by kind of broadly talking a little bit about, so when we talk about trauma, what are we talking about? So first and foremost, the thing that I think becomes really critical is that, for there to be, trauma is kind of an interesting phenomena, and most of the materials that I'm going to be drawing on, and I would actually encourage you guys to kind of refer back to this as you think about kind of engaging services, is a document put out by the American Psychological Association in 2015 that lay out some guidance for competencies for education and training for folks who are thinking about doing some work in trauma. And I think it'll be helpful to you all as you think about how do you connect with service providers in your community who might say to you, I have the skills and ability to actually do what it is that you're asking. And so beginning there, so when we talk about trauma, there needs to be an event or something that happens that is either directly experienced, witnessed, or you learned about, or maybe repeated over time that causes the individual to kind of feel as if their life is threatened, and serious injury is threatened, or sexual violence is threatened, sexual and or physical violence. And so the issue that's there is sometimes we think about trauma as, it could be, and embedded in that is some consideration for each of our individual thresholds for what it is that we can or are able to tolerate. So for some folks, the trauma triggering event might be at a lower threshold than other folks. And so kind of recognizing that there are individual variation that might play a role in how folks either experience or respond to a trauma-inducing event. And related to that is kind of understanding the broader definitions, which include issues related to intergenerational trauma, trauma that's passed on from one generation to another. So one of the ways that we kind of think about that is that, if you think about men going in or men being incarcerated, we oftentimes think about how that might impact the individual who's being incarcerated. But if you think about the children that are attached to that man, then we have to kind of think about what might that intergenerational transmission of risk, how might that play out within the next generation of folks that are coming up there. And related to that are the issues related to kind of historical trauma and thinking about how the trauma histories of the folks that we're working with play a role in their ability to kind of be the kind of parents we are working with them to be, and in the way in which that kind of impacts the children that they're working with, the children that they might be attached to. And then the other piece that's there is kind of thinking about oppression-based trauma. Within the communities that we might serve, there are different subgroups that kind of play a role in how we kind of think about this issue of trauma. And so folks who come in who are in some communities where there is violence that might be enacted because they are from a specific ethnic or cultural group that is marginalized or stigmatized because of politics or other kinds of issues that are going on, we might see that the trauma that they might experience based on that can impact how they kind of put their world together. And so then the question becomes, so why are we thinking about this? I began by telling you guys a little bit about my kind of beginning thinking about this issue. And so the reason why we kind of think this becomes critical is because men who come to this work come with different experiences, and they actually impact the goals of fatherhood programming. If I can't get past the issues that are there that kind of impact on me, what you're trying to train me to do then becomes that more difficult. So there's a whole body of research out there demonstrating that trauma negatively impacts one's health outcomes and impacts health disparities. So I come in and I see you, and I'm indicating that, oh, you know what, I have hypertension, and these things are going on. Some of the factors that might be playing a role in my expression of these issues might be that long-standing history. Long-standing trauma history that have kind of now manifesting itself in a more physical health perspective. Related to that, there are a number of folks that are kind of begin to identify, kind of look at the relationship between how our mental health plays a role in kind of how our physical health functioning kind of comes out. So I might come into you saying, I have this stomach ache that's going on, and when you actually dig a bit deeper, you realize that my stomach ache is related to my trauma history, or I might come in with a complication from diabetes, and more exploration of the complication from diabetes, realize that mental health plays a role in whether or not I can actually effectively manage my diabetes. And so to kind of help you be able to manage that, there's a way in which you kind of have to think about how our mental health plays a role in that. The other way that it comes up too is that, as we've worked to kind of address this issue of trauma, there's a clear indication that our biases, assumptions, and our reactions to the folks who present with trauma history impact how we kind of relate to them. And so sometimes I feel as if there's a little bit of a push and pull piece that's there. So I come in angry, mood all over the place, and you then begin to punish me because you're saying I am not actually wanting to be, how should I say, cooperative with what it is that you're trying to work with me on. Now, the good news about fatherhood work is that, and I think my two colleagues that will follow me demonstrate how you guys have been more than champions in kind of saying to, systems, and I use that kind of broadly, as well as a community, that we have to create a space where these men can talk about what's going on with them, deal with the challenges that they're experiencing, and you advocate for them in a very good way. So I think that this work and kind of the things that we're going to be talking about today very much so align with the way in which you guys do think about your work, that the practice that you're engaged in, and support that. So there are pieces around kind of thinking about also the extended network that might be attached to these men. So, as we talk about how we work with the partners and current or past, the family networks, the social services agencies, we have to kind of think about how that experience of trauma kind of permeates or impacts how they enter those different systems and what the system's responses to them are. This issue of trust becomes really critical because I think that, why you guys do your work that you do and why you guys are so effective at what you do is that you're able to build really good trust with the men involved in our work. And so kind of thinking about those things becomes really, really critical, and then thinking about it from a lifespan perspective and thinking about how, when the trauma impact becomes really critical. So as we think about this work, we have to think about, how, what's the survivor's strengths. So what are the strengths that they bring? What are the areas of resilience that they've been able to demonstrate? And where do we kind of think about there's a possibility for them to grow? And we should also incorporate in this context, issues of kind of shared decision making. How do you engage them in a conversation about what makes sense to them and how that relates or does not to kind of what it is that you're trying to work with them around. And so we should always be considering our self-reflection skills, kind of, okay, what am I trying to do? How does this make sense? Our own ability to assess the skills in affective content management. So how are we managing what the clients are giving us or how they're interacting with us, and two, what is our ethical responsibility for the care of them and their extended family network. And again, going back to this, how our own history plays a role in impacting this. So why in fatherhood work? Currently, the reason why is because men who present for services do so with trauma histories. And they come from a number of vulnerable groups. So there's also research showing that as we think about folks' exposure to trauma, there's some things that exacerbate, the experience of trauma, including coming from a lower socioeconomic status, being a person of color and kind of how that plays into that, having lower educational or academic acumen, age plays a role, disability, coming from a military background, or even sexual and sexual orientation. So thinking about how all these issues, all these factors compound to kind of mushroom the experience of trauma within our folks' life is really critical. And so why in fatherhood work? This becomes really critical because if we can begin to kind of think about how the experience of trauma can make the men that we're working with challenging to work with, and we can understand that trauma might play a role in this, it might help us to begin to kind of think about how we might approach it differently, how we might ask different kinds of questions, and how we might get around these barriers in a different way. It also, because of their trauma, because of folks' trauma history, it might make it a little bit more difficult to engage in. One of the things I know that as a psychologist, if you can find a way to kind of think about the person in a more sympathetic way, it makes it easier for you to engage with them even when they're a bit challenging. And so kind of thinking about how their trust issues might play a role in that, how we help them figure out how they can do stuff around emotional regulation, how we understand the intersection between their physical health and their mental health, and trauma, and how trauma can play a role in kind of negatively impacting that. And so what we know is that men who have trauma histories may have used violence in their lives in the past, and might resort to violence as a way of kind of managing stressful situations. How do we then recognize that and think about how we kind of work with that? They might present with poor physical health or poor mental health, and how do we kind of think about kind of working with those issues? And they might use substance use as a coping strategy to manage that experience of trauma. And then there's pieces around poor social functioning. I don't know how to interact with others in ways that can help actually facilitate the things that I most want. I might not know how to relate well to an employer because of my perceptions about what it is that they may or may not be trying to do to me. There's also an issue about kind of thinking about how that might decrease the quality of life for the individuals. And kind of going back to my initial kind of introduction to this topic, it's kind of thinking about how this might play out in having them have limited access to their children in real ways. And then the last but actually more challenging piece is kind of recognizing that there's an empathy place that kind of plays a role here. There's some research showing that folks who kind of who've experienced trauma may be challenged with the idea of empathy. And so the question that then comes up is then, how do I connect with providers? What do I need to be thinking about that? And I would argue, kind of going back to that American Psychological Association report that I talked about, is that providers should demonstrate competence in kind of some scientific knowledge, skills, and attitudes around the scientific knowledge around trauma. Do they understand that? Do they understand the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that are related to assessment of trauma? So it's not sufficient for us to know that someone had a trauma experience in their life. It's also important for us to understand in what area did this play a role in. How do we think about what does that mean for that individual, and then what that natural next step is. How then do we intervene around kind of doing that? Do they have the knowledge for interventions? Do they have the skills that are there? Do they have the attitudes that relate to that? And issues around professionalism, kind of thinking about how I practice as a provider, and then understanding the relational and systems issues that might impact the person, the work, and their extended networks. And so when we think about how we engage providers, we have to be very cognizant to kind of think about these issues of knowledge, skills, and attitudes across a number of domains as we kind of interview around that. Now, all of this conversation might suggest that, oh, well, what do I do? Well, the good news is that there are some treatments that are out there, and I've listed a couple of them that have been shown to be effective with individuals, and these are just 3. But the list continues to grow, and so the issue then becomes, how do we think about these issues? But also, as we think about kind of the fidelity of things, how do cultural issues impact or adapt or connection with service providers and their adaptation of and use of these? So, for example, if I'm a low-income Latino male, monolingual, coming into services, what do I need to kind of think about in that way to make sure that we are kind of using a treatment services that is actually I'm using the word synchronic, but in sync with how that individual puts their world together. And is the provider culturally sensitive sufficiently enough to actually engage an individual and work with them in a good way? And so, given all of that, I would say that, as we kind of move this work forward, these are things that we need to be thinking about as we think to engage men who come through our doors in any way. So I'd like to end by that and say thank you for your time. And I pressed the wrong arrow, and you can get a hold of me if you have any questions there.
Well, thank you very much, Derek. You've certainly set the stage for the conversation. And we're now going to hear from 2 practitioners who have really been sort of taking these kind of words to heart. And so we're going to learn a little bit about how they and their programs have become more trauma-informed. So our next presenter is going to be Mr. Lamar Henderson. He's the program coordinator and a parent educator for the All Dads Matter program in Merced County. He works for the Merced County services agency there in Merced. He's been facilitating the Nurturing Parenting program, the Positive Discipline and boot camp for new dads, working with a variety of fathers there in the urban area of Merced and the outlying rural areas. He's a certified trainer for the Adverse Childhood Experiences Overcomers program, that they have a secular and a faith-based training, and Lamar and his colleagues went through the secular version of that. He was recently invited by the California Attorney General to participate in a Changing Minds and Creating Trauma-Informed Communities convening. So he's very knowledgeable in this area, and he's going to tell us a bit about how the All Dads Matter program has incorporated some of these ideas. Lamar, take it away.
Good morning, and thank you very much. I echo a lot of the sentiment that Dr. Gordon shared exactly in regards to this very important work. So as Nigel shared, my name is Lamar Henderson, and I am the program coordinator for Merced County Human Services Agency's Fatherhood program, All Dads Matter. But I have to be very transparent and share that I am Virginia's husband for 26 years, Marla and Mariah's dad for 26 years. We have a 26-year-old and an 18-year-old, and a perfect 19-month-old granddaughter, Malia Simone. So that is who I am. I would like to share with you our program and a little bit of some of the services that we offer and how we offer these services from a trauma-informed perspective. The All Dads Matter Fatherhood program started about a little over 10 years ago, and it was a response to by our then Human Services Director, Anna Pagan, in regards to the fact that there was very little to no services being offered to fathers in our community via the child welfare system other than anger management. And so we started with the Boot Camp for New Dads Fatherhood program, and Boot Camp for New Dads is a one-day, 3-hour workshop for first-time or expectant fathers, where we bring in guys who are expecting babies in the next 90 days. We bring them in with veteran dads, and a veteran dad is a father who has completed the workshop that has a baby that's 0 to 6 months, and their father brings the baby to the workshop, and during that time we get to coach or orient those rookie dads on everything from how to hold the baby correctly, how to change a diaper, what to pack in your diaper bag, but even more significantly, we start the workshop out with 2 very provocative questions. And the first question we ask is, give me words to describe your dad. Now, for some, this may be a very easy question to field, but for a lot of the dads that we serve, it's a very deep and profound question as it relates to their relationship with their father. And then the second question we ask is, now imagine that it's 15 years from now, and I'm talking to your child. And if I ask your child, give me words to describe your dad, what will your children say? So it allows that father to kind of project forward and dream forward in regards to the kind of relationship that he wants to have with his child. It also offers an opportunity to kind of explore what are the issues that I may need to address now so that 15 years from now, I write the narrative that I want as it relates to my relationship with my child. We also offer a men's support groups. We offer it in Spanish on Monday nights from 5:30 to 7:30, and then in English on Tuesday and Thursday nights. And the support groups are co-facilitated by an All Dads Matter staff and a licensed clinical social worker. The model for the group specifically, and this is directly coming from our clinician, Rich Brown, who I work side by side with to facilitate the men's group. The model for the group specifically written to provide an emotional curative experience so that men can unlearn the negative responses they have to their current life trauma. So that is the goal of our men's support group. We also offer a program called Leadership for Life, which is 10 one-week workshops where we offer an opportunity for men to learn how to navigate the different systems of our community, how to communicate within those systems, aggressive, assertive, passive, and then how to advocate for themselves and their children. While designing the curriculum for Leadership for Life, one of the things that we're very conscious of is the trauma that men have experienced with different systems in these communities and how that presents when we show up to access these systems. And I gave the example of where gentlemen in our community that might have experienced some trauma in regards to the court system may get a fix-it ticket, but because their experience with the court system is when I go to court, I go to jail, fix-it ticket can quickly turn into a failure to appear warrant, and how that continues to traumatize that gentleman and then also affect his family. Then we have male engagement activities, and this is a collaboration with our school districts, specifically Head Start, where we go into every Head Start site within our community, and we do male engagement activities, either focused on, and the focus of this is to bring men and children together in an academic environment that does not re-traumatize or bring up insecurities as it relates to a father's ability to enhance his child's education based on his own experience in the education system. So all our male engagement activities is focused on enhancing the strengths of that father, to bring them in and feel invited, empowered, and to understand that they play a critical role in the way that their children interpret their experience with education. We do a Man Plays with Food workshop. We do a Silly Slimy Science workshop, Men and Kids Moving and Learning, Digging in the Dirt, and then we're creating one right now around literacy, where dads get to create a storybook for their children and then use that as a way to engage in their children's academic experience. Every year we celebrate fatherhood within our community, and this is an opportunity where we have a free event to really promote and celebrate fatherhood within our community. Now these programs that we're offering, including the fatherhood celebration, is an opportunity for not only for us to impact and provide services and support to our families, but it also has an effect on these different systems and services that are being offered within our community as a way of creating a father-friendly and safe environment for our dads. And then we have an All Dads Matter Resource Center, which is a one-stop where dads can come in and get support accessing any services that they may need within our community. Our men's support group is really an opportunity for us where the trauma and past traumas and present traumas has an opportunity to really be addressed. Very quickly, when men come to our men's group, they find that it's a safe environment, it's a nurturing environment, and very quickly they get to unpack some of those traumas, those barriers that are creating unwanted outcomes in their relationships. You know, most men who come to our men's group for the first time, and just to preface that with, our men's group is, all of our services are completely open to the public. You don't need to be a Human Services Agency client to receive our services. There's absolutely no charge for any of our services, and we ask for no identification, so you don't have to be documented. This is important when you consider the demographics of our community, where we're 54% a Latino population, and sometimes that can be a barrier to accessing services. But we don't ask for any of that, so it creates an opportunity for everyone to access our services. Many men that I've met that come to the men's support group, as they're preparing to come, and sometimes I get referrals from child welfare system and also family court, will tell me before they come to the group, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to show up because I need to get my kids back, but I don't participate in men's group. And I'm a bit of a jerk when it comes to participating in any kind of groups like that. And so my response is, great, that's just how we like them. You know, just come on in. And the fact that you show up already tells me what I need to know as it relates to your motivation to be the kind of father that you want to be and your children deserve. And so this is some of the things that come within our men's group. We have a curriculum that we use within our men's group, but it's a true support group format so that the issue of the day drives the topic of the men's group. And organically, all these different topics come up as it relates to the curriculum and being able to address those issues within that men's support group. The value of having Rich Brown there, a clinical social worker, as well as myself or an All That Matters staff, is you get two life experiences. You get the clinical approach from the LCSW, who's there to really acknowledge and address any potential mental health concerns that may be coming up. And then you have another staff that's really what we consider, we use the term brings the real, what's really going on, you know, to have that conversation with this gentleman in regards to, you know, the fact that you're using drugs, You spent up all the rent money. The services have been shut off. Your woman had to leave you and take the kids. It was a matter of her survival and those children's survival. So let's work on what we need to work on so that we can address those issues that you may be self-medicating, so we can work in and help you to get the family experience that you want for you and your children. How we became trauma-informed, it's interesting that we would use that term trauma-informed because from the birth of the All Dads Matter Fatherhood program, we were always very aware of the sensory stimulations as it relates to how men respond to different issues, how men respond to different concerns or barriers. Depression may present differently for a man than it may for a woman. What was that man's childhood experience, and how was that showing up in their relationships with their children? But even before that, we looked at ourselves as practitioners, as facilitators, and really examined, what is it about me that makes me respond to this person in this particular way? And is my response creating a barrier to the healing process for this father, for this person? So if a person comes in and they're very agitated and maybe somewhat aggressive, why is my first inclination to respond in an aggressive manner as well? Or is it more therapeutic for this man, for me to dial it down a little bit and check myself? One of the things that we always do is as soon as a person walks into our doors, our staff, our receptionists, they're very welcoming, acknowledging them and then celebrating them for being there. We always have water and some kind of refreshment on board so we can address those challenges before they even walk in. Just as a way of practicing the skills of being trauma-informed is something that we were practicing way before we had the language trauma-informed. It was just a way in which it's just a spirit in which we wanted to do business that would be welcoming to dads, that would create an opportunity where not only would they get a healthy experience with us, but when they go out and share this with their peers will want to come in and get support as well. Some of our community partners, through this work, we've been able to partner with several different agencies and different partners within our community. Child support is right across the parking lot from us, and so whenever there's a dad that comes in and maybe he's very agitated in regards to his child support issues, maybe he's not getting the visitation with his children that he would like, then they always send him over to us. And what we do is we don't do legal services, but we help them to understand the process and also help them to understand and refocus on what is your goal. Through the Human Services Agency, because we're a Human Services Agency program and we do offer all those human services, we can have an impact and influence on creating a father-friendly environment throughout our county so that when a dad or a family shows up to apply for services, they'll see posters in the lobby that depict fathers in a positive light so that men don't come in feeling defeated by the fact that they have to seek support and ask for help. And one of the things that we always share with our dads is that one of the most critical and most healthy skills that a man can establish is the ability to ask for help when you need that, and then still maintain your masculinity and feel good about it. Family court recommends dads to us all the time, especially when there's a mediation issue going on, and the mediation has transcended into a war. And with every war, there's a collateral damage. And for family court, the collateral damage are the children. And so we bring dads in and have a chance to discuss with them and help them to refocus what they're there for in the first place. Don't spend 2.5, 3 years fighting for an hour and a half on Tuesday when what you really want is a healthy, loving relationship with that child throughout the duration of your life. So those are some of the things that we talk about and also work with as far as our community partners. Probation refers dads to us. First Five is one of our partners. They help to fund the diaper bags that we offer through Boot Camp for New Dads. Health organizations always refer to us. So throughout our 10-year existence, nearly 11-year existence, we've been able to build a trust equity, not only with our community and the fathers that we serve, but also with the different agencies within our community so that they can refer dads to us or even give them our information and have the dad contact us on their own. This work is extremely important, and I think it speaks to exactly what Dr. Gordon was sharing in regards to the way it affects our families and our children. And it's really about talking about resiliency and talking to dads about resiliency and seeing them as a positive influence in their children's life. Because, I have dads that come into my office all the time. And when I have a dad that comes into my office and they've been struggling either with substance abuse or years of incarceration and absences within their child's life, the first question I ask them is, well, what was your relationship like with your dad? And overwhelmingly, those dads share with me, when I was a kid coming up, I always said I never wanted to be like him. But now when I look in the mirror, guess who I see? And so that offers that opportunity to discuss, well, what can we do to change that narrative for you in the long run and change that experience for your children? And the fact that you came in here today already tells me what I need to know in regards to the kind of father that you want to be. So it's just when it comes to being trauma-informed, our ACEs training has been very, very helpful. The men helping men in recovery has been very, very helpful. But it's also, even before that, it's within the spirit in which we do our business, with the ideal and the focus always being not to re-traumatize, to be compassionate, to be supportive, but also to be able to hold men accountable and to create that opportunity for healing.
Well, thank you very much, Lamar. I think you really hit on the nail there.
Sorry about that. Oh, my timer.
Hey, well, you're right on time. That's great.
Yeah.
So, as I was saying, I think you really hit on the nail there. The importance of this fatherhood programming and just the way you talked about helping guys change the narrative and focus on the important things. I think that's what this is all about. So before I introduce Kerry, we're just going to have our second poll question real quickly here. So now we're asking, does your program have a referral network to refer clients impacted by trauma for clinical counseling when needed? I'll just give you a few minutes to respond to that. Again, I'll go ahead and introduce Kerry while we've got that up there. So Kerry is the co-founder and executive director of the Downham Project in Birmingham, Alabama, and she's going to tell you why it's called the Downham Project. She's been recognized nationally for a 15-year career as a federal technical assistant consultant in the areas of fiscal and human resources. She developed a user-friendly software called Grant Suite, and she's trained multi-funded governmental programs. She's received numerous awards, and in July 2014, the program was actually recognized by the White House as one of 4 most effective career readiness programs in the nation. And I first came across Kerry actually quite recently. There was an article published talking about various trauma-informed programs, and I was very impressed by what that was saying, and so got in touch with Kerry, and she's got a wealth of information to share with us here. So without wasting any more time, Kerry, the time is yours.
Thank you so much, Nigel. Good afternoon to everybody, and great job by my co-presenters, and I echo really pretty much everything that they say. But as Nigel said, I'm the executive director of the Downham Project, and I need everyone to understand today that our agency was actually birthed from a tragedy and from trauma that my husband's family endured at the hands of someone who himself actually was trying to exist on the outside of prison from trauma. But we were created about 15 years ago, and we're named the Dannon Project because my youngest brother-in-law, I never had an opportunity to meet him because he was murdered by a young man by the name of Jermaine, and we'll talk about Jermaine a little bit throughout the presentation, but Dannon was a teenager walking home with about 11 other kids one day after school, and Jermaine had been released from prison about 3.5 weeks earlier. He had served about 4.5 years in prison for selling drugs and returned to a community that was not prepared to receive him. He also returned to a community, to a family that did not want him at home. So he was living in ditches and sleeping under people's garages, front porches, wherever he possibly could for during the course of the time of his post-release. Couldn't get a job. He had a distribution charge. Couldn't get public housing because it's legal to discriminate against someone in Alabama if you have a distribution charge. Couldn't get food stamps either. So he was basically left on his own with $10 because that's what you get when you leave the penal system in Alabama. But so he met Dannon with these 11 other kids. He got into a little verbal altercation with a young man that was in the group. He pulled out a gun that he had stolen from someone's house during the 3.5-week period that he was out. He did not point the gun at anyone, but he did raise the gun. He shot the gun one time. The bullet ricocheted off the corner of a building, and as Dannon was running like the 11 other kids, the bullet unfortunately lodged in Dannon's back, and he died about 9.5 minutes later. And so after I met my husband, I learned quickly that my husband's family was not only in trauma, but that after speaking with Jermaine, we realized that he too was in trauma. When he committed that crime, he never intended to kill anyone that day. In fact, he said, I never pointed the gun at anyone. But from that point, we realized that if we wanted to do something, if we wanted different outcomes in that community, what we had to do was we had to start an organization that helped people like Jermaine. So our sole intention was to help the Jermaines of our community by providing resources that they needed, training that they needed, and other services that they needed to get on their feet, and also to prepare our communities to receive people when they're coming home from prison. At that time, the state of Alabama had a recidivism rate of over 60%, and so we recognized that the state didn't even have a great response or even a half response to people that was returning home from prison. Our sole intent at that time, of course, was to help nonviolent previously incarcerated persons, because what we learned in Alabama was that a lot of people that served time for nonviolent offenses reoffend within about 3 years on a violent crime, and we were victims of that. So, but since then, 15 years later, we now also work with juvenile offenders. We work with persons who are young adults who are out of school youth between the ages of 16 and 24 who have dropped out of school for various reasons. And we also provide a youth bail program. We're a nonprofit organization, and we provide a number of services: case management, reentry, wraparound supportive services, education, occupational training and certifications, restorative justice, the whole nine. We serve about 500 nonviolent returning citizens a year, 200 at-risk youth, and no fewer than 200 other high-risk populations in our community annually. We first became informed about trauma-informed principles after about 2 to 3 years of working with this population, working with nonviolent adult persons that had served time in prison. And we started observing some behaviors in our participants that they were genuinely happy, of course. They were very excited those first 2 weeks of being released, but then we started noticing it never failed that between the 14 and 16-day mark that there was a depression that was very real. There was behaviors that were not normal. And so we started documenting what we were seeing, what we were observing. And we were already partnering with the Alabama Department of Public Health, and we provided that information to them, asking them to provide mental health services to our participants. And after a period of time, the Alabama Department of Public Health recommended that or that I basically attend a conference that the Women's Bureau through the Department of Labor was hosting. And so, of course, I went. And what I can honestly tell you is that from that seminar we learned a lot. I learned that attending that seminar that not only did I need to learn more, but that my whole agency needed to learn a lot about trauma-informed principles. But I can honestly tell you that I and we as the Dana Project, that we have a vested interest in understanding what a trauma-informed systems of care approach is, and that, we're working to figure out how to meet the needs of our participants, as well as documenting how we have chosen to move forward to address those participants. I would strongly impress upon each of the attendees today that a trauma-informed care organizational approach is an ever-evolving process and requires ongoing learning. Further, after attending the seminar, I walked away with the realization that traumatic events happen to all people at all ages across all socioeconomic strata in our society, potentially causing terror, intense fear, horror, helplessness, and physical stress reactions, as both of our presenters ahead of me have already said. Finally, I walked away realizing that Jermaine, the one person that actually changed the course of my life and my husband's life permanently, was indeed a victim to trauma and also a perpetrator of causing trauma to us and our community. The reality is Jermaine's trauma was hiding in plain view. Next, I realized that trauma is so prevalent that we naturally assume that many of the people we serve have in some way or another been affected by trauma. And yes, although sometimes we can detect the effects of trauma from visual perspectives and through the process of conversations, we also realize that utilizing assessments and building of relationships are the most effective methods for determining traumatized participants and how to serve their needs, meet their needs. Well, after attending the seminar, we really began seeking additional training opportunities and determined that our entire agency, right down to the environmental services team, needed trauma-informed care training. We set aside time to complete an organizational assessment to gain an understanding of what we actually knew versus what we actually thought we knew. We realized that we didn't know much about anything except for the fact that we are truly an organization with a culture of fostering positive relationships, and that we foster strong, compassionate relationships, which is half of the battle with trauma-informed care approaches. We also realized that we were already providing services that foster a trauma-informed environment. That was yet another one-fourth of the battle. Further, we gained a sense that our services are based on an optimistic, strengths-based, and evidence-informed approach, but that we still didn't have a cohesive, we didn't have policies, we didn't have procedures, we didn't even know how to speak to each other about, we knew what some of the symptoms were, but we didn't know really what we were doing here. So overall, our general understanding of our approaches they were non-existent. So that's why we chose to have an organizational assessment, but also to get additional training so that we can work on all of those issues and get those issues addressed and fixed. However, it was much more important for us to understand that if we truly wanted to move from just being a compassion-filled agency providing services needed, we had to embody a trauma-informed culture agency-wide. What I did not want was to be an agency where staff, through our ignorance, became an agency where we re-traumatized people and interfered with recovery during deterring the supportive healing process. So, what do we do, how do we do it, and why do we do it? The agency realized that our trauma-informed care services didn't need to be focused on treating symptoms or syndromes related to trauma, but rather for us to deliver primary care, mental health, addiction services, housing, etc., things that we were already doing, but just doing it in a manner that's welcoming and appropriate to the special needs of those affected by trauma. We also realized that we needed to develop a training guide on what we learned about trauma-informed care and how to move forward with client services. We determined that a paradigm shift was actually necessary to implement our trauma-informed care approaches. We then revised forms, policies, and procedures for effective service delivery. And then we realized that outside of the Department of Public Health, we really needed to develop new relationships for staff training as well as for service delivery. Having an awareness of how trauma impacts people is essential to the healing process. So after conducting the organizational assessment and implementing all of the changes, we realized that some, not all staff, needed to undergo a paradigm shift. We began to realize that as participants share their trauma or display their trauma, we know that the trauma was unexpected, the person was unprepared, and that there was nothing that the person could do to stop it from happening. You see, it's not always the event that determines whether something is traumatic to someone, but the individual's experience of the event and the meaning that they make of it. So what we decided was, when we pulled together this chart, was that instead of us thinking about clients as being as sick, ill, or bad, that we would decide that we would approach it as that clients are actually hurt and suffering. Another thing is that clients can't change and stop a more destructive behavior if they only had the motivation. That's a traditional paradigm, but we realized that clients needed support, trust, and safety to decrease maladaptive behaviors. These are just some of the things that, we realized there needed to be a paradigm shift in our agency. We also defined what the 4 types of trauma for us, what it is, but we developed cheat sheets so that people could have that at their ready disposal to determine when they identify and see behaviors that's associated with the trauma. We determined trauma type characteristics in our clients by conducting exercises of real life scenarios that was happening with our clients. And we documented possible approaches and scenarios for each type of participant affected by the trauma. At the very core of our trauma-informed care approach, we have replaced labeling participants, if you will, as resistant or uncooperative with that of being affected by injury. We believe that viewing trauma as an injury shifts our conversation from asking, what is wrong with you, to what has happened to you. So I want to talk about 3 examples of participant trauma that we actually experience pretty much on a weekly basis. One example is a heterosexual father that was raped while he was incarcerated. Another is someone was killed by mistake during a participant crime spree, and we actually know that happened, but to Dannon. And that, we have fathers that's been incarcerated for lengthy periods of time, desiring to have a positive relationship with their children. And so they all have experienced trauma. It's all different types of trauma, but in the same regard, they still have to be treated and met individually. So we customize services for each of our fathers, each of our participants, regardless of what led them to the trauma or through the trauma, and we respond to them based upon their individual needs. I spoke earlier about having the need to develop additional relationships, not just for learning what this is, but to keep us well informed, to keep us trained, but also so that we can have services to be able to provide to the participants as well once we were able to determine what the effects of the trauma was, as well as treatment for those exhibiting mental health issues. Some of those relationships was the Alabama Department of Public Health, JBS Mental Health Authority, and Licensed Social Workers of Alabama, the association for that. And they have been provided a wealth of resources and training as well as counseling services to our participants. Some of the suggestions or tips for agencies who are also working with fathers experiencing trauma, I strongly recommend that if you have not done an organizational assessment to determine what you know or what you think you know, or your staff or your agency, everybody, all the way down to the janitor, that you look at that. You consider having an organizational assessment. That, you have to understand that the training is not a one-time shop. It's routine, and it has to be intentional. It has to be part of your professional development plan for your entire agency. I strongly encourage people to review and revise their policies, their protocols for their systems of care, to develop an organizational framework for an understanding and a responsiveness responsiveness to the impact of trauma-informed care. And then if you don't have clinicians on board or on your own team to provide these much-needed services for counseling or anything of that nature, I strongly encourage you to seek partnerships and additional resources to support clients affected by trauma. But you also need that for your own staff as well, because realize we're all human, so we have issues that go on at home as well. So you don't want to have your team coming in and they're facing trauma, and then they got to listen to trauma or deal with trauma all day as well. Here's some resources that I identified and am sharing here, and I hope we used a lot of these resources ourselves and refer back to them a lot, as well as some of the other resources that were already previously mentioned. Here's some lessons learned for advocating for your clients as well as your staff. Beware of staff burnout and compassion fatigue. I mean, dealing with the populations that we deal with, and I'm sure a lot of you all deal with, it's very easy over an 8 or 10-hour day to become fatigued and burned out about listening to other people's trauma when you have issues going on yourself. Develop a resource guide for both staff and clients. Make client and staff safety a priority, and then promote an environment of empowering staff and clients with choice and flexibility. What we learned was when providing choices to involve the client in the decision-making process with regard to their treatment, to their service options. That's when possible. Inquire about counseling in the past and offer referrals if indicated. Ensure that the client feels comfortable during invasive assessments and procedures, but also make adjustments to these processes when the clients request it as often as possible. Another thing that we do is we allow the client to set the pace, to slow down and take breaks as required. We may have our agenda that we want them to get this done in an hour, but the reality is you don't want to go back and re-traumatize them if you're trying to make them do something within your time frame. I think a good thing is to continually inform the client of what's happening during encounters and assessments. And where possible, give the client choices about their referrals. Involve other service providers that are already involved in the client's care. And then try to understand the meaning the client gives to the trauma from their own cultural perspective, because our cultures are different. And so we can't try to impress our culture up on someone else when it doesn't work that way. But also understand what healing means to the client within their cultural context. And I really just challenge people to be open to learning and asking questions about the client's culture. But for our organizational and work setting responsibilities, what we had to do was to try to step back and to create a psychologically safe workplace. This really means that we try to promote an environment that's not only trauma-informed with principles, but making sure that our staff and our clients knew that our environment is safe, it's trustworthy, and it's not just for those receiving the services, as I said earlier, but also for those that's providing the services. Trauma-informed workplaces place a high value on staff wellness, as well as open and respectful communication, and in doing so, it really makes an important contribution to addressing the impact and healing of trauma exposure response. One of the things that I think that you can do for your staff is to promote a team environment and work in a team environment, but more importantly, create a culture to counteract the effects of trauma. And then, some of the ways that you can do that is by establishing a clear value system within your organization. Other things is obtain supervisory and management support, but remember the general approach is to seek solutions, but not to assign blame. And more importantly, communicate openly and effectively. Ensure that there's transparency and expect a high degree of cohesion. So with that being said, I turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Kerry. Yeah, and we really like Kerry's slide here to say that it's an open discussion, and so now we're going to have an open discussion here with the presenters. We've got a few questions come in. I encourage you to send any more, even if we don't have time for them. As I said, we will try and address them and post them online. Just to follow up on one thing that Kerry said, which I think is really important, understanding the cultural perspective of the clients and what healing means in their culture. And, it can be a problem sometimes to find a provider in the community who understands what you're doing in your program context. So I'd just like to ask, I think mainly Derek, but perhaps Kerry and Lamar can chime in on this too in terms of, so if I could start with you, Derek, though, have you got any advice for the audience in terms of how you can connect to a culturally aware provider in the community who you can send your fathers to with confidence that they're going to get the treatment they need? Derek, are you on mute?
Sounds like he is.
Okay, maybe we've lost Derek. Well,
Derek's line has disconnected.
Oh wow. Okay. Well, hopefully he can join us again. Yeah. So, well, let me pose that question for either Kerry or Lamar then.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Sure. I'm just wondering if you have any advice for ways to connect with a culturally relevant mental health provider in the community. If you've got a father who you've seen has got some issues that you really can't handle in-house, how would you recommend you find someone in the community who can really provide those services in a culturally appropriate way?
Absolutely. We work very closely with mental health and also the Sierra Vista Family Services Center, as well as Castle Family Health. And one of the things that we do before we even refer or recommend one of our fathers to those services is that we have a conversation with the service provider and really understand the importance of the culture in which we provide our services, and understand that we want to the importance of not re-traumatizing. So our practice is when we make a referral for someone to go see someone outside of our office, because understand they've already invested trust in us. We don't just send a referral and send them over there. Our practice is to take them over there and do a one-on-one introduction, even if they want us to sit in for a little bit until they get comfortable, and then do a gentle handoff approach, and then continue to follow up with the client and see how things are going. Sometimes it requires that we step in and be an advocate for that client in regards to maybe some challenges that may be coming up within the therapeutic process. So it's a continued relationship. We don't just hand them off and cut ties. We continue to build that relationship and continue to be there to support them through the therapeutic process.
Great. Thank you very much, Lamar. Yeah. Let me pose the next question to Kerry, and I see Derek is back with us, so we'll make sure we pull you back in here, Derek, in a minute. So the next question is, what kinds of recommendations would you offer for trauma-informed programming, particularly with teen fathers? Is that something you could speak to, Kerry?
Yes, and we do work with juvenile offenders as well as young adults in our youth bill and our out-of-school youth programs, and we do have issues with that. We do have to address those types of things. But again, we reach out to our public health agency as well as the mental health authority, and we're blessed in that our local mental health authority has treatment providers that's for young children, young adults, as well as adults. So it's broken down by category like that. And so when we work with them, we do something, it's actually a team-based approach. It starts out initially with a referral, and then the service provider will follow back up with us. We do something called a participant profile, where we talk about, where we are able to share results from the assessments that we've provided, and we do something called a GAIN assessment on our youth. And then the service provider that's actually providing the counseling will have a team-based approach meeting with us as well as juveniles and or their parents or whomever their guardians are. And we talk about treatment options as well as what's allowable, what's not allowable, what's desired, what's non-desired of the parent. So it's a whole bunch of things that you have to kind of negotiate up front, but it's not just an overnight process. It is something that takes time, but yes, we do work with that. But again, it's it's not, I don't want to say that it's a lengthy process, but it does take time. And you have, every service is done by, it's initiated through the case manager. Every participant has their own case manager, and it is driven initially by the case manager, but it's driven from conversation, one-on-one, as well as the assessment. So that's what initiates everything.
Okay, great, thanks. And Derek, did you have something you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I do. I think that the other thing that we need to consider as we think about working with teen dads more specifically is not only kind of their histories through assessment, but thinking about kind of where they're at developmentally. And so recognizing that not every 15-year-old is at the same place in their own development, and kind of considering the issues related to kind of adolescent brain development. As we kind of do this work, we have to kind of be thinking about that, because there is some evidence that, depending on the kind of trauma that the kid has been exposed to, it could have negative effect on kind of biologic functioning too. And so kind of thinking about how development, either psychosocial or even and biological, are impacted by these experiences, and making sure that that's a part of our consideration at a minimum, and our assessment, I think, more appropriately when we think about working with these individuals.
Okay. Well, thanks, Derek. It's good to have you back.
I'm sorry about that. I went to speak on touch a speaker and I hung up accidentally.
That's okay. It happens to the best of us. Yeah. So I do have a few more questions. I don't think we're going to have time to get to all of them. Let me ask this one, and then we'll have our evaluation question, and then we'll come back for another question or two if there's time. But I do want to leave time at the end for everybody to just give us a quick final takeaway thought, if you want to be thinking about that. I've got just a general question here. Let me pose this first to you, Lamar, and anyone else can chime in if they want to. But the question is, if you identify that a man is suffering from the effects of trauma, do you talk directly to them about that, or do you simply identify that for yourself and then just let that inform the interaction that you have with them going forward?
Well, what I usually do, before, most of the time that'll present itself when we meet one-on-one, and then I'll have a conversation with our clinician before we go into our men's support group, and then I will defer to our clinician in regards to what will be the best strategy for us moving forward to support this particular dad dealing with the particular trauma that he's dealing with. But my role in that is just to create an environment where that dad feels safe. Create an environment where he feels welcome and he feels safe, and nobody's going to be freaked out by what has happened to you. And then also to engaging him in some conversation in regards to his resiliency, and the fact that you have survived these things and you're here today says a lot about you and your character and who you are as a survivor. So so as it relates to the therapeutic process, I do defer to our clinician and consult with him before we move forward, because when we bring that person to our men's group, and even if we meet with them one-on-one, we want to be very conscious not to re-traumatize, and also to make create an opportunity for the maximum potential for healing.
Great. Thanks, Lamar. Yeah. Let me just pose a quick question for Kerry, and then we'll have our general evaluation, and then we'll come back for a few more. So, Kerry, this is a question asking about the changes in policies and practices that you had mentioned. Can you give an example of what was changed on a staff or an organizational level to prevent that secondary trauma and burnout?
Yes. When going back to the one question that I did pose earlier, rather than saying, what is wrong with you? We're asking what's going on with you. We just change, and we actually go back to our policies, our procedures, as well as our job descriptions. We talk about that. Despite how, a person may be behaving or reacting to a question that you ask, or just walking in that day and they're already in a bad mood, you cannot, as the staff, re-traumatize them by showing that you're upset, or that you're physically upset or mentally upset as well with them, but that you stop, you take a pause, and you then turn around and ask the question differently so that it dials down, fears, it dials down them being angry and upset, because it's really not you that they're angry and upset about. So we changed the way that we talk to the staff about how they respond to our participants. And then if you need to get another person to to stand in and observe somebody else's behavior or whatever, do what you need to do so that, one, that the client feels safe, two, that you feel safe, three, that we're all protected, that no one is, that you can kind of reduce fights, if you will. You can kind of reduce a whole lot of other alternative behaviors, if you will. But just the way that we talk to them, you cannot raise your voice at them, despite if you want to, and despite if they're raising their voice at you. You cannot physically assault anybody. Not that that was happening anyway, but we still wanted to get it documented. But the way and watch, especially social media, the way if they start texting, if they start coming by, if they start hanging out in the parking lot, we put policies and procedures in place on how to respond to when something is going down or going on with your client or your participant. How do you respond? In writing, orally, the whole nine. So that's one of the ways.
Okay, well, great. Thanks, Kerry. Enzo, can we just pull up the evaluation questions, and we'll do that, and then we'll come back for some final words here. So again, this is just to get your feedback on these three questions. I think you can see them on the screen, so I'm not going to read them. I'm going to let you do that. While you're doing that, there is one question that just came in that I think is pretty important, and I would just like to give everyone a chance to quickly respond to this. It may mean that you can't do your final thought, but I think this is perhaps more important. So the question is, do you recommend having a participant complete a trauma survey at program intake? If you'd just like to offer some thoughts on that.
Yeah, this is Derek Gordon speaking. I think that it might be helpful to get some information. I think the question that comes up for me is, what are you going to do with that information when you receive it? And so, the researchers, my colleagues have talked about the importance of keeping the folks safe. One of the ways that can happen too is, if you're asking about folks' past trauma history, it might signal them. So the question that comes up for me is, do you have the resources on hand so when you ask that question, if something adversely happens, you can manage it in the moment so that you can then actually deal with it. And so I would say asking the question is never a problem, but the issue for me that comes up is, if you ask a question, are you equipped to deal with the repercussions of asking a question? And I'm not saying that you should shy away from it, but I'm saying put the supports in place to be able to do so.
Okay, anything to add to that, Kerry or Lamar?
Well, we don't do a questionnaire, things of that nature when they come in. For that reason, we don't have a clinician on board or staff on board to deal with a situation that may trigger crisis. What we do is, as I shared, have that initial one-on-one conversation, and then bring that client into the men's support group or meet with them one-on-one with the clinician as a way of asking those questions and then being able to effectively respond to their responses.
Okay, thanks. Kerry?
Yes, we do ask about issues that may have occurred prior to you getting to us. One, because we have a lot, the majority of our participants are coming from prison, and it's very important for us to know, what we're dealing with, because at that initial one-on-one, what we're doing is we're not only going back over and verifying and validating that this is something that happened to you. Now, how can we work together? First of all, do you even want help? But then, how can we work together to start working on some of these things that have impacted your past, your current, and your future? And then on top of that, what we do is we immediately put an action plan together to start working towards addressing some of those those issues. So yes, we do ask those questions at intake, and we start a plan immediately, an individualized service plan immediately on addressing those things.
Great.
If I could just kind of chime in as well as one of the things that we ask when we start the men's group is that after you've been there for the first time, after you've been here participating in the group for a month or so, we ask that you come up because we want this to be a productive group for you and to address your specific needs. So we can either work one-on-one with that dad to establish a plan to meet his needs, or he can work on them and then share them with us. But it's a way for us to guide the service process for him.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Lisa, did you want to have a final word here?
Thanks, Nigel. I just want to thank everyone. This has been an excellent conversation and discussion, and hopefully you can use the information that we have here to inform your program. So thank you to our presenters, and thank you to all the attendees. And thank you, Nigel, and your staff.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa. Yeah, we are over time, but I will give each of you just sort of 10 seconds if there's one final thought you'd like to leave the group with. It's got to be real quick, but Derek, do you have a final thought?
I just say remember the issues of trust and safety.
Thank you. Lamar?
I agree as well. Understand that this is most important work, and that it has a tremendous effect not only on the fathers that we're serving, but also the legacy that father leaves as it relates to his family and children.
Yeah, wow, yes, thanks. Kerry?
I echo both of the presenters, but I just want to challenge everybody to make sure that as they're developing trauma-informed care principles and approaches in their agency, don't just think about the client, but also think about your staff as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, thank you very much, everybody, and thank everybody for joining and the great work that everyone's doing out there. So let's carry on and let's keep changing the world. Thank you very much. We'll talk to you next time.
All righty, bye-bye.
Thank you. And again, ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude our conference for today. We thank you for your participation.